Hey, welcome everybody. Today we have a working session, so not a presentation and meeting, but more interactive. Um, I think we're gonna wait a couple more minutes, just see if anyone else filters in. On the Sched site, it says there's 92 attendants, so I feel like some people might be in the bathroom between sessions or something like that. So we'll just wait a bit longer before we get started. All right, so today's session, the Wiki-vengers initiative, it's a working session to develop best practices for comics Wikidata. And our session leader, Kate Topham, who's a digital humanities archivist at Michigan State University. Big fan of their dairy and serves as their digital archivist on American Religious Sounds Project, and works on other projects involving preservation, metadata, digital curation, and linked data. So I'll hand it over to Kate.
Thanks so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to see you all here this morning, especially folks on the West Coast where it's still a little bit early. Real quick, I just want to introduce my fellow original Wiki-vengers here on the call. We have Allison Bayland, who's Acquisitions and Cataloging Specialist at San Diego State University, Anna Close, who is Metadata Initiatives Librarian at The Ohio State University, and the newly minted Justin Weigard, who was a recent graduate with his PhD in English here at Michigan State. So this session is designed, as was mentioned, it's a working session. So we're here to come together and figure out, start defining some best practices around comics and Wikidata, whatever that means, broadly defined. So I have a document here with the session description, some goals, some topics, and a schedule. Since we have the full 90 minutes, we'll start with just a discussion with the full group, talking about what issues are there in modeling, describing, representing comics in Wikidata, and trying to establish something we can work on today. What can we accomplish, whether that's making cradles, making new properties, making documentation, fleshing out a wiki project page, whatever that is. And then we will, for about, so hopefully that full group discussion will take, we'll devote 15 minutes to at most 30 minutes. And then we'll break out into focus groups for about 50 minutes. We'll see if, how much time, and then and those groups will work on whatever issue, whatever kind of thing they want to work on. And then when we're at 10 minutes to the end of the session, we'll come back together and share out about what we've worked on, what we've accomplished, and kind of next steps. So now we can go into kind of our discussion on different topics. This session came out of the Graphic Possibilities Research Workshop, Wikidata events. We've held a few editathons where we've added a bunch of comics data to Wikidata. Michigan State University is one of several universities that has a pretty substantial comics collection. So we've been working with that metadata and trying to get it into the, getting as much of it as possible into Wikidata. And so we've been holding these Wikidata events. Traditionally in the fall, we do the editathon, and then in the spring, we do a visualization workshop. And at the end of our visualization workshop in the spring, we were talking about how there were resources missing. There was some documentation that we needed in order to make this work easier, because there's just around comics, there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of open questions that we felt that it would be helpful to start to hold a working session around comics as Wikidata, as we like to call it.
I just dropped our events page and the visualizations in the chat as well, for folks who might be unfamiliar, just to see kind of a little bit of how these events have run, and also like what we've been able to create, but also, you know, a lot of what we end up talking about in these events are what's missing, right? Whether it's, we only have so many participants. So, I'm really proud of the visualizations we created, but there's so many more that can be created, right? And just figure I would share out with everyone so you kind of have an idea of like what we've done in the past couple of years.
Thanks, Justin. One really helpful resource that already exists is the San Diego State University Comics Application Profiles and Wiki Projects. So Allison, can I put you on the spot to kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I can talk about it a little bit. Let me put our whole page. So we actually started this as part of the PCC Wikidata pilot, and there are 2 of us. So it's not a very big project at all. We have one person who's also translating everything we do into Chinese. But that is the extent of her work in the Wikidata project. So essentially there are just 2 of us, and there was nothing really available. So we just kind of built it from the ground up, and have slowly been plugging away. But there's just so many issues with how, especially comics are modeled, and like there's so much conflation in Wikidata too. I mean, there's a lot of conflation in OCLC sometimes, but in Wikidata, you'll have the television series combined with the comic, combined with the individual issues, all on one record. And so in order to do works, I have to go and separate all of those. And it's just a complete mess for so many different things. So many statements are unsourced. The publishers are a complete mess. Like I've been trying to work on DC Comics for a while now. I finally got the giant book, The History of DC Comics, through Interlibrary Loan. So I can try to deal with some of like the sourcing issues, but just all the changes too with all the publishers, where it was a merge, it was separated, it was sold, but only part of it was sold and part of it was sold to somebody else, the parent companies and everything, just trying to model everything in Wikidata in a fashion that makes sense, and trying to verify the information too is just incredibly, incredibly difficult. And so I attended all of the MSU sessions, I believe. And that was kind of the inspiration. The first session I attended was kind of the inspiration for our project. And we're slowly still going. We're trying to do all of the comics at San Diego State, which is a lot. So it might have been overly ambitious with only 2 people, but we're just plugging away, and hopefully we'll be able to get students at some point involved, maybe some classes or something to help out.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I sympathize with the like conflation issue. While we were working on our project at Michigan State, we discovered that we had conflations in our MARC records of like, there's a colorist who has the same name as the creator of Marmaduke, famously. And all of our, like all but two of our Marmaduke comics were attributed to the colorist. Who works on like DC Black Label. So like definitely not your wholesome Great Dane hijinks. And so when we started putting our data into Wikidata, that conflation got pushed into Wikidata. That existed in the OCLC. So there was like, so that issue exists in multiple places, but it was also a lot easier to fix in Wikidata because it's much easier to like deprecate statements and say like, this is the wrong guy.
Yeah, I was kind of looking through a bit of, you know, as we've held these events, I've tried to kind of catalog some of the conversations that we've had. And some of like what we ran into was some of the stuff that's going on in the chat, you know, but also we realized that like we need to continue like creating items for all of the quirks that go along with comics, things like anthology comic series being a slightly separate, you know, like subgenre or category, whatever you want to call it, of comics. As well as like just trying to fill in different kinds of comics genres or comics formats. But we also realized that there's a lot of categorization and description updating that would be really helpful for things like race, sex, gender, et cetera, that is often, you know, absent in these. And so we also had a lot of conversations about trying to continue filling out as much of like this comics Wikidata as we could. But as we did, we kept running into, you know, quirks and hurdles and, you know, trying to get to the bottom of this person being labeled as a creator, but, you know, with a little bit of comics knowledge, you might know that they're listed as like they're the letterer or they're the artist. So it involves a lot of clarification and cleaning up as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I just want, I've seen a few people hopping in, and I just want to let you all know we're kind of in the open discussion section of our working session today. I will put our session document back into the chat. So as we're chatting, please do unmute and contribute. I'd love to hear from some of you what your interest in comics and Wikidata is. If you've done anything with it, if you don't know anything and you're just here with a lot of enthusiasm, that's also great. But if there's, as we're talking through these various issues, if there's something that interests you, please like jump in. I know it can be like hard and weird in a virtual environment like this, but.
So I think Wikidata has so much potential for research. And what was interesting is the last event, because I've gone to all of these events that MSU has done, and they're fabulous. Julian was saying, okay, I'd like a visualization on Black superheroes. And then I tried to do it. And that's when you start looking for information, you're like, oh my heavens, this is what I'm finding. And that's when you're saying these are the gaps, these are the problems. You see things being conflated. And then it's kind of a little bit easier to go look in and say, okay, now I need to fix that part and fix that. So I kind of ended up doing like more fixing things to make that visualization work. And we ran out of time, but it was interesting because we had, there was also challenges in terms of how to assign ethnic groups to this. And that's the weird thing is as a metadata librarian, I'm used to things being very standardized. And the thing that I noticed in Wikidata is you might have two different kinds of attributes for what, you know, some entity is that are used inconsistently across the board. And the one that I put in our notes and really irks me is sometimes you'll have somebody referred to as a comics artist or a cartoonist. And so when you're searching, that can be really frustrating, because if I was looking at a library data set, I'd have no, like, okay, that's the term I want. Although not that it's perfect in libraries either. But it means that you kind of have to think about, do you want to create double data in there? Or do you want to stick to one standard? And I really love that, for instance, San Diego created this nice best practices documentation that we can work with, because I think it would be really hard to start from scratch. But we've seen some really interesting problems in terms of modeling. And that's why I put in the notes the part about fictional characters that inherit a superhero role. It gets really murky in terms of the modeling, where people kind of conflate a lot of concepts. I can't find an example, but I'm pretty certain that we've had ones where it was like the comic series and the character got conflated. So it's, and then you really want to dive in and fix things, and it's challenging, but it's also fun.
Yeah, and I think that the one that lands really well, like the example, is trying to find information on comics Wikidata about Captain Marvel, who now it even gets more confusing, right? So you have Captain Marvel, the Golden Age comic, versus the Golden Age character, versus all of the different current iterations of that character named Captain Marvel right now, and it gets headachy. Or as Joni put in the chat, right, like all of the different kinds of Batman series that have been released in the last 80 years with that have different numbering potentially, it gets messy.
I think there's probably a paper in here titled "Cataloging the Multiverse," with all the different versions. I think I remember seeing one with like Spider-Man, where like there's like the Peter Parker Spider-Man, and then there's Spider-Man, the platonic ideal of Spider-Man that like all the other Spider-Men like are linked to. And yet still, I think the ultimate Spider-Man still was still conflated with like the Peter Parker Spider-Man. And then there's of course like a million Peter Parker Spider-Men. So what do you do? Yes, the Spider-Man superclass. So I think it seems like there's like some interest in modeling characters. I think it's also interesting to think about it in like in using this kind of data for research, since Allison was part of the ethics presentation on Monday. I think it's important. We also have to think about, since we have to make sure that we're describing things ethically, and there's a lot of difficulty around, there's like ethical challenges around race and gender and ascribing that to comics characters. Like we had a discussion about T'Challa and Black Panther, and like, do we want to like make sure that like marginalized people are represented in Wikidata, but we also don't want to like ascribe a specific identity on like a fictional character when like it's different, right? We can't be, well, like T'Challa is not African American, he's Wakandan. Is that an ethnicity? I don't have a solution for that, but it was a conversation that we started to have.
Well, yeah, because the ethnic group label mixes actual group names with fictional, so you have Spock is a Vulcan in there too. So then there's questions about should those even be together, which maybe we don't want to go down that rabbit hole. It's easy to go down rabbit holes.
Yeah, that's one of the problems. So we're coming up on our like half an hour time for discussing. What kind of things do people want to continue talking about and working on in smaller groups? I think we've talked a lot about modeling works and modeling characters, and about resolving like conflation issues. So those I could definitely see focus groups for, but there's also like lots of other things, like if for folks interested in like modeling comics, we could create some cradles, which it's basically a form for creating a Wikidata item. There's also like just coming up with documentation for how to model these kinds of things. We also had the idea of coming up with writing a Wiki Comics manifesto for basically defending why we need to like have why it's important to have why it's important to have comics in Wikidata, and like what the benefit is of it. There's also a big list of topics at the bottom of our document today. So if any of those things speak to you, please like feel free to speak up or drop something in the chat. Thanks, Adriana. Okay, thanks, Jim. We'll start making breakout rooms. And it looks like we can make them numbered, but so. Breakout room section. So I'm noticing that we're losing some people, which is which is fair. I have definitely been that person who's like, oh, it's breakout room time. I don't have the social energy for this, and that's fine. So I think let's maybe we can have 2 or 3 breakout rooms. Before anyone joins, in the like breakout room section, I started putting like modeling characters to deal with the like Uber Spider-Man issue, and then modeling works. Anyone have an idea for a third thing?
Theming events sounds useful. Wiki editathons, I mean.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's plan to go into these breakout rooms and like start working. But if you need to, go to bathroom, get coffee, please feel free to take a break as you need it. And we'll plan to come back. We can plan to come back at like 11 at 11:20, which is right before the session ends. But if we feel like we've gotten to a good stopping point, feel free to kind of move around breakout rooms or come back to the main session. And you can message me in the conference Slack if if your group ends up kind of disbanding and you want to talk about more things or change your theme. But okay. I will say I will release you to whatever room you want to go to. Room 1 is characters, room 2 is works, and room 3 is editathons and theming. All right, I'm gonna hop into room 2, I think. And we're gonna say anything?
I didn't see a room assignment, but I got up for tissue.
Oh, I think if you do you see a breakout rooms thing on the bottom?
No, but maybe I'm just not. Oh, here, join breakout room. Okay, yeah, sorry.
No worries. Hey, everybody, welcome back. John and I have been deep in the weeds, specifically with regard to Iron Man. And it's been a lot of fun.
We had a lot of fun in our group too. We went all over the place.
Which group were you in?
So we talked about theming Wikidata editathons, but we also, Justin, also we went into the Manifesto, and we talked about best practices. We kind of just zigzagged all over the place.
Yeah, I think that the technical term for it was I word vomited out some stuff about comics Wikidata, and my group mates helped coalesce it into something that looks slightly presentable. Very, very drafty, but yeah, we very much talked about develop some strategies and tips that we think have been really helpful for hosting and theming Wikidata events for comics, like shorter, narrow focus, community centered, really visible or tangible output, and really keeping them kind of short and sweet seems to be a helpful thing.
Awesome. That's great. There's so many notes. I've been I was working on the comics wiki project page, just taking it over because there was pretty much nothing there. So as a side note, if anybody wants to be added as a contributor to this project, please just send me your wiki your wiki username. My email's tophamka@msu.edu. And I'm hoping to kind of put some of these conversations into that wiki project and start. And I want to make sure to credit you all with contributing, even though it'll have just there'll be a bunch of edits under my name. I don't want it to seem like it's just me. So that was room 3. Room 1, how did it go? What'd you do?
So we talked a bit about how characters are modeled, and it makes more sense to add characters to the work rather than say present in work. Because you're going to end up with so many if you list Batman and every comic that he's present in, if they eventually all get uploaded, because you have to consider all the Batman, all the Detective Comics, all of the Justice League, Justice Society, everything else. So we also got sidetracked a bit and talked about theme music.
Okay.
And specifically how it relates to characters, like the Spider-Man theme, which we listened to. Because it is specific to Spider-Man, but it should be on then the television series, because Batman's theme is on the item for the Batman television series and stuff. But how can you relate the fact that it was specifically made for that character to that theme song? We don't necessarily have a way to do that yet. And then we also talked briefly about how to model the multiple deaths of characters and the resurrections.
Oh, okay.
And stuff, and some sourcing circumstances. And we looked at how some religious figures, such as Jesus, are modeled, because there are, various dates listed, and there are a lot of sourcing circumstances, and some dates are preferred, and, kind of how that would work then if you tried to bring that to a fictional character, because that's the only example that I could think of where there's just so many, there's so much uncertainty. And for a lot of comics characters, there's so much uncertainty because they existed and then they were retconned out of existence and then they're back again. But is it the same character or is it somebody different? And, you can put sourcing disputes and that sort of thing in references.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that idea of having multiple statements for character depth. I think we're going to, and I think we'll have this issue with the character of Black Panther, since there's things that since the cinematic universe is going to have to change what happens to the character. There's going to have to be a like difference between the character in the comics and the character in the movies. I'm also thinking about like with all the multiverse stuff that ultimately, like, I've seen Doctor Strange and I thought it was going to get more whack than it did. I was very surprised, I have to say. But yeah, I like the idea of seeing how Jesus is modeled. But John and I worked on defining best practices for modeling like series, sub-series, and volumes and issues. And we used Iron Man as kind of our example to start thinking through this stuff of like, okay, I think I like the Iron Man as like comic book series, that item exists. But Marvel has published in editions series that do not have the title Iron Man, but still considers them to be part of the Iron Man series. So we were thinking through how to say like Iron Man comics partially contains what was it called? Tales of Suspense? Yeah, Tales of Suspense, which contains various issues within like the Tales of Suspense series. We've just got like a bunch of nesting dolls in comics, which I think I don't think it's a bad thing because it just gets more information. It might be difficult to handle and think through if you don't get deep in the weeds. But I think there is value to having individual items for like individual issues, especially when there's like, oh, this character shows up in this issue, because people might be interested in like tracking characters and their appearances outside of their own like specific series. So I just want to thank you all so much for participating in this session. It's been really, really fun. And I'm hoping we can continue doing this work and expanding the projects page and developing more documentation. So please. Oh yes, Marianne, yes. Moon Knight with multiple personalities. I'm very interested in that. Mostly because I just love the Moon Knight series very much. But I think please do email me. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm like just so jazzed that we were able to have this session and have these conversations. So hope to continue them in the future. Anyone else have any like final thoughts?
Thanks for organizing this, Kate. This is really helpful. And I'm very appreciative that you took the lead in organizing it because I would not have done it this well. So thank you so much. Rockstar as always.
Well, thank you so much. But I think we can close out and I will release you. Just keep your eye out on more comics Wikidata stuff.